Good evening, everyone. Hopefully, we're all doing well and adapting to our new situations. This week, we're going to be discussing Gestalt Psychology. Now, this was started by a group of young German psychologists who had their own Descartesian moment, if you will, where they rejected what they had been taught thus far. Now, the prevailing school of thought in European universities at the time was the idea of elementism, which was popularized by characters such as Wundt and others, who held that sensation and perception could be broken down into its smallest components and then studied from there. Also, at the time, we had Pavlov and the ideas of stimulus and response taking hold. Both of these were considered molecular approaches. They were looking at individual elements of sensation or individual elements of behavior. Gestaltists held that this philosophy was completely missing the point. That if we look at mere isolated elements, we're completely missing out on the bigger picture. We need to be looking at complete behaviors and complete perceptions, a more molar approach. Now, if you remember back from chemistry class, the ideas of molecular mass and molar mass, they actually translate fairly well here. Molecular mass being the mass of an individual atom or molecule, whereas a molar mass would be the mass of a group of molecules that is so large we have to have a mathematical constant just to represent it. It's essentially the same idea. Yes, individual elements of perception or behavior can be studied, but there's little purpose to it because they don't acquire meaning until we start collecting them into larger and larger configurations. It's kind of like the Depeche Mode song, everything counts in large amounts. It's a question of scale. If you look at the whole picture, it shows so much more than just looking at the pieces, and it is far more interesting. Because if we truly want to understand behavior or really understand perception, we have to look at the whole picture and not just the individual elements. Because if we just spend our time looking at the little pieces, we completely miss out on the purpose and the meaning of behavior. Which is why I am recording this little rant from my kitchen. So around me, I have eggs in the fridge. I have flour and sugar in the pantry. Eggs are, well, fantastic, let's admit it. Sugar is the poster child of sweetness, and flour is, well, floury. Individually, they all have their own characteristics. But if you put them together, the whole can be so much more than just the sum of the parts. And that is the essence of Gestalt philosophy. We don't have any chance whatsoever of understanding the true purpose of behavior or the true meaning of perception by looking at little artificial, isolated pieces of behavior, little snapshots that are recorded that don't have any connection to everything else. We have to look at everything as a whole. Because if you look at everything as a whole, then indeed it truly is greater than just the sum of all the little pieces. Now, Gestalt thought did have its critics. There were some that felt that its concepts were too vague to actually apply to anything. And of course, behaviorists hated it with a passion. Although, if you remember Tolman from previous chapters, he actually did incorporate some elements into his work that were very Gestalty. And even earlier, William James and his ideas of functionalism were definitely sort of tapping into the same kind of vibe that Gestalt turned into. And much to the chagrin of the Watsonians out there, Gestalt did remain influential and still remains influential to this day, even though it doesn't have its own specific school that's titled with it. It's still incorporated into many facets of psychology. Cognitive psychology draws on a lot of the elements of Gestalt, and it is also extremely influential in the field of social psychology. it has basically permeated modern study, and it is true to its nature, making the parts into a better whole. Stay safe. Have a good week.